So sticking with the Tyranids theme, I thought today we'd take a look at the brand new unit refresh which came along with the new Kill Team Typhon, which is the fancy updated Ravener models. Now these guys do look absolutely fantastic. I think they look brilliant. I cannot wait to get my hands on them and paint them up. But how do they actually perform on the battlefield, and will they be a nice addition in your army lists? Well, to go along with their new updated design, they have actually had quite a few changes from their older Codex update, both in terms of their core rules and also actually in their unit size. So previously they could be taken in a unit of 3 or a unit of 6 for either 75 or 150 points, and their price per model hasn't actually changed. They are still 25 points each, but they now have to come in a unit of 5, so they will, at minimum, set you back 125 points. So they are a heftier investment now if you wanted to just bring that bare minimum unit by about 50 points. So it is definitely harder to just slot in that small min unit with some spare points, but overall they do work out to be the same price per individual Ravener. In terms of their main rules, they have largely kept the same. They've got the same stat line with a 10-inch move, toughness 5, 3 wounds, that typically poor leadership of 8 that you see on a lot of Tyranid units. But of course, remember, they do have synapse, so that can help as you get the benefits from that if you're near a synapse creature as part of your army rule. They don't actually have that synapse buff themselves, they just get the keyword, so they benefit from the 3d6 leadership tests when they have a nearby synapse unit. So they do need a synapse unit to be nearby to babysit them. So something that can move up as fast as they can, maybe something like the Trigon Prime that we saw in yesterday's video, can help to make sure that they don't fail those crucial battle shock tests when you really need them to pass them. Where they did see a small buff though is that they do now have a base 4-up save. Now this is a kind of buff, kind of not, because you could previously get a 4-up save. It was just an option that you had to pick. So previously they had the choice between getting a 4-up save or having a token ranged attack, which was their thoracic bioweapon. This just used to give them each 3 strength 4 shots at 12 inches. So it wasn't anything particularly exciting, and I don't think losing that is especially a big deal. Going to the base 4-up save is just a quality of life change more than anything, and it is actually quite nice. It does mean with their 3 wounds at toughness 5, they can stick around a little bit longer than you might think, but they are still definitely very, very squishy, and things like heavy bolters or onslaught gatling cannons, they will just rip through your Raveners if you aren't careful with them. The new datasheet also contains a few choice new keywords. They gain the Borrower's keyword, which we saw yesterday, as you would expect, to help them interact with the tunnel markers from the Subterranean Assault detachment. But they also very nicely finally gained the Vanguard Invader keyword, which they didn't have before. So now even in one of the other detachments, the Vanguard Onslaught, they are much, much more viable now. They can now move 10 inches and still advance and charge. So that can actually get them a pretty respectable 20 to 21 inch threat range. So maybe not a turn 1 charge, but they are still pretty zippy at getting from point to point or objective to objective to help clear the enemy off them. And in terms of clearing enemies off objectives, they have also had a few big changes in their damage output. Most notably, they've dropped from a whopping 7 attacks each down to just 3. So from your max before, from a full unit of 6, which could be throwing out 42 attacks, now the maximum you can put out from a full unit is a much less scary 15. However, to balance that out, the attacks you do have are quite a bit better. The old profile was 7 attacks at strength 5, minus 1 AP, 1 damage and twin linked. This has now changed to 3 attacks, which are still strength 5, but they are minus 2 AP and 2 damage and still twin linked. So they are admittedly much, much worse at chewing through light infantry like guardsmen or fire warriors or orcs, but they are now a bit better into tougher targets like marines. Despite that, they still do only kill on average 1 marine per Ravener, so that actually isn't much better than what they did before. The old profile with 7 1 damage attacks still on average killed about 1 marine. The new version is just a bit more reliable because obviously just 1 failed save will kill a marine. I think overall I have to say I think their melee is a little bit worse because sheer volume has a quality all on its own in some cases, and they are now significantly less effective into those lighter units like guardsmen, and then even against tougher things like marines and tanks, the improvement there just isn't enough to warrant that drop from 7 attacks down to 3, I don't think. So that is a shame, but they can still be somewhat scary if you bring a full unit of 5 of them at clearing through some smaller squads of marines and that sort of thing. For your abilities, you still have Death from Below, which is the same as it was before. It gives them a sweet uppy down ability, so at the end of the enemy turn, if your Raveners aren't in engagement range, they can jump off the board and then come back in via Deep Strike, which they also have ready to put some pressure onto an enemy part of the board they weren't expecting, or if nothing else in the Subterranean Assault detachment, just help you set up even more tunnel markers, which you may need if you are planning ahead and want some of your other units in reserve to be coming on the board to threaten parts of the board. So it does give them quite a lot of utility in that new detachment, but I think even if you aren't bringing that detachment, even in some of the others like Invasion Fleet, it is just a really strong rule to try and catch your opponent off guard and put them on the back foot with a unit of Raveners popping up right where they weren't expecting it. Overall, I think I would say the updated Raveners seem pretty okay for their cost. 25 points isn't cheap, but at the same time, it's not super expensive for 3 toughness 5 wounds, and they can still do a relatively okay job of blending through enemy infantry, just not as good as they could before into the really light stuff. They are sort of like melee warriors, and I think whilst they are arguably a bit worse than melee warriors overall, they are much faster, and especially in the Subterranean Assault detachment, they do bring a huge amount of utility and extra mobility tricks for your army, so in that detachment specifically, they can definitely be worth taking. However, that isn't all we got on the Ravener front, because there is another new datasheet, which is an even more elite specialist unit of Raveners. The hyper-adapted Raveners are an alternate build for the kit and also come in a unit of 5, but with a small, different selection of weapons. Now, the hyper-adapted Raveners are much pricier. They are a hefty 165 points for 5, so these guys are 33 points per model, which is quite a lot. However, to balance that out, they do actually get a few extra wounds just from their leader, because they do come with a leader, the Ravener Prime. He is 6 wounds instead of the usual 3. Aside from that though, they are essentially the same. They're movement 10, toughness 5, and they've got a 4-up save. In essence, this unit is about an extra point per wound compared to the regular Raveners. These guys can also, very interestingly, actually lead a unit of Raveners thanks to the Ravener Prime being a character, so you can make a really quite scary 10-strong unit of the hyper-adapted and the regular Raveners. Now, it will set you back a whopping 290 points, but that will get you 33 toughness 5 wounds that can move up to 10 inches and unleash quite a lot of attacks into your opponent. The hyper-adapted Raveners, unlike the regular ones, have heavy claws and talons, which are the same, 3 attacks at strength 5, -2 AP, 2 damage and twin linked, but they are anti-monster and anti-vehicle 5+, so they're actually reasonably effective now into some really tough targets that are toughness 10 and above. The Prime himself has prime claws and talons instead. These are the exact same stat line as the heavy claws, but he's got 6 attacks with them instead of 3. So he is essentially the same as the other hyper-adapted Raveners, he's just double the wounds and double the attacks. Where he does differ, as mentioned, is that he's a character and he also has the Synapse rule and the Shadow in the Warp rules, so he can actually help with your relatively poor leadership for any battle shock tests, as well as putting that -1 to rolls debuff on the enemy when they're within range when you do unleash the Shadow in the Warp. So that is actually quite a nice utility tool to have if you are bringing Raveners, and also with how fast these guys can get up the board is quite a good way to make sure that some of the enemy do fail that Shadow in the Warp battle shock test. What you also get with the hyper-adapted Raveners is a token shooting attack. One of them has a weapon called the Venom Bolt. It's a 12-inch range attack with a d6 plus 3 auto-hitting shots that are strength 6, -1 AP and 1 damage. It does also have ignores cover and assault, and is essentially a souped-up heavy flamer. Now, only one of them has it, but it actually can do quite a lot of work. It will kill on average about 3 orc boys or even 4 or 5 guardsmen, so it can make quite a big dent into some squishier enemies before you charge in. So it's definitely well worth remembering. It's not like a token bolt pistol attack or something that you can quite often forget about. This will actually do some work into the right targets. In terms of their datasheet rules, joining the hyper adapted Raveners to a regular unit can be quite a good idea, if pricey as I said, because the hyper adapted Raveners have the Alpha Invader rule, which gives their unit sustained hits 1. So this not only helps the hyper adapted Raveners, but if you join them to the regular ones, that gets you a lot of attacks that can potentially be proccing an extra hit on a 6. And it certainly can go some way to help making up for the loss of so many attacks from the old Ravener profile. The unit also has a ruled Hypersensory Array, which allows a unit to use Rapid Ingress for free once per battle round, and even if another unit has already used it this turn. So you can use this to really get the most out of their Deep Strike rule and set them up in enemy lines behind some cover to keep them safe, ready for a quick scary charge in their next turn. And again, joining these guys to the regular Raveners also unlocks the uppy downer tricks from the regular Raveners, so you can make a unit that is unbelievably tricky to pin down with not only uppy downy but also free rapid ingress and a 10-inch move. They really can get to wherever you need them to be unbelievably quickly, and as I mentioned, in a big unit of 10, unleash quite a lot of attacks into the enemy. With -2 AP and 2 damage and sustained hits and twin linked, they are actually quite effective. A full 10 strong unit for 290 points, as I said, yes, it is expensive, but that full 10 strong unit can expect to cut through a full unit of 20 Orc Boys or 20 Guardsmen fairly reliably. They can chew through a full 10-man squad of Marines in one go really reliably, and even into some of the tougher targets in the game like Custodian Wardens. With their 4-up Feel No Pain active, they can still do some okay work. They will on average kill about 2 or 3 of them, so it's actually not bad into what is one of the tankiest units in the game, and they also have a not impossible chance of just wiping out the unit entirely if those Wardens aren't using their once per game Feel No Pain. So despite everything else, they can be pretty scary in terms of their output. Now, yes, as I said, it is a pricey to be sure, but if you set them up right, using their tunnel marker tricks in the Subterranean Assault, or their Advance and Charge in Vanguard Onslaught, or even in something like the regular Invasion Fleet, they do have a lot of use. If you give them, say, lethal hits from the Detachment rule in Invasion Fleet, they can drop around 19 wounds onto an Imperial Knight in single combat, and they have about a 30% chance of wiping it out in a single go. So they really can do a lot of work really well in a variety of detachments, and whilst I think most people will immediately see their use in the newest one, they can still be very good in several. I think taking a cheap anti-infantry unit from the regular ones is still relatively good value for 125 points, whilst the pricier hyper-adapted option still has a lot of potential in my opinion, even at that 165 point cost. Being able to go into some tougher targets can let them punch up and make their points back if you are careful with them, and then even going for the full 290 point max unit, whilst a big investment, is a scarily fast unit that you should, with all the tricks available to you from their datasheet and from your detachment rules, allow you to get them into the target that you want them to go into, so you can use that to set them up that even if they then later die, you are getting them to kill or damage exactly what you need them to. So from that point of view, although they are going to be expensive, you can definitely set them up to make it so that they're going to be worthwhile taking and warrant their inclusion in your list. And that is the new Raveners. As always, I'd love to know what you think of these guys, if you are going to be bringing any Raveners or hyper-adapted Raveners in your armies going forward, and which detachment you think they work best in. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do like and subscribe for more Warhammer content from me, but until next time, I'll catch you later, guys.